The Mission Impossible franchise has produced some of the most impressive stunts in movie history. But what about the original film, which came out almost 30 years ago? Have these stunts aged well, like Tom Cruise, or has time been cruel to this very 90s action flick? I'm going to break down the movie's biggest stunts, find out how they were done, and give them a rating to see just how good they look today. Let's get on with it.
You're worried about me. Why?
You can't talk about the original Mission Impossible without starting with the iconic scene that everyone was talking about. No, not the one that looked like a sunglasses advert. The one where Ethan Hunt was auditioning for Cirque du Soleil with his wirework skills. This ridiculously tense sequence must have been in the running for most copied of the 90s. Back then, Cruise wasn't known as the man of action we now know him as today. But this scene changed all of that, as it was one of the first where he insisted on doing everything himself. According to Cruise, the sequence that changed the actor's career was something of a happy accident. The actor says that the director Brian De Palma came up with the idea before they even had the movie's plot in place. If you've seen the plot, or lack of it, this makes sense. De Palma first mentioned the vault sequence to Cruise on a long-distance call when the actor was in Japan promoting another movie. He pitched the whole CIA sequence on the phone when Cruise was in the back of a car, and remember, this was 1996, so this probably needed a phone as big as an Easter Island head. The stunt was modelled after the classic 1955 French film Rafifi, which has one of the all-time great movie heists. Like that movie, the choice was made to have the heist with no soundtrack to ramp up the tension. Cruise was keen, so they made it. When it came to shooting, De Palma and Cruise relied on the expertise of legendary stunt coordinator Greg Powell, responsible for stunts from James Bond, Jason Bourne, and Harry Potter. Cruise performed the scene on a soundstage in England, populated only by De Palma and the rest of the stunt team. It was all done by hands, pulleys, and weights. Cruise's choice to perform the stunt himself is crucial to his success, along with De Palma's choice to not cheat the action by cutting around his leading man. But he couldn't avoid a little bit of cutting when it came to the pivotal moment when Cruise gets dropped just short of the floor, or at least they could have done less cutting around the shots, but dropping Cruise from the ceiling and hoping for him to be okay would have been a little bit optimistic. Even with filming the shot where he's balanced above the floor without the drop, they had problems. Cruise kept hitting his face, so to save his chin, De Palma warned Cruise that they'd have to move on and pick up the shot later. But the actor refused to give up and came up with a makeshift way of keeping his body balanced, putting £1 coins in his shoes. Doing an impression of human weighing scales, Cruise eventually managed to get himself level, and the scene went into movie history. But does it stand up today? Even now, the scene is super tense. This is because it was done for real, and wires don't tend to age like computer graphics do. More on that later. Yes, the computer itself looks like a relic now, but you have to let that slide. As for the stunt, it's still fantastic, and even when you know how it's done, still stands up. That's because there's not much movie trickery here at all. What you see on screen is very similar to what was done on set. This one gets 9 out of 10 stars because nobody's perfect, not even Tom Cruise. And he proved he was human when he managed to get himself injured on the next stunt. Mission Impossible, Eraser, and Jackie Chan's First Strike were all released in the same year, making this a very bad year if you were an aquarium. This is because these movies were all fond of blowing them up. In the scene where Tom Cruise has a race with thousands of gallons of water, it didn't all go to plan. Greg Powell and the actor didn't see eye to eye when it came to prep for the stunt. The shot, again, was being done for real with a controlled explosion, which meant lots of water and lots of glass. The whole thing became an amusing yet slightly scary ordeal to work out. This is because when Cruise and Powell were talking about when the explosion would happen, they couldn't agree on whether to run on 1, 2, 3 or 1, 2, 3, go. Kind of like a life-threatening version of rock, paper, scissors. Cruise faced the challenging task of outrunning 16 tons of water, and his timing had to be perfect for the shots to work. So no wonder he wanted to be sure when the glass would blow. Whatever they agreed on, it might not have worked completely, because Cruise walked away with a hurt ankle. The scene is an impressive display of director Brian De Palma's talent for building tension, and also a great use of angles and coordination. Cruise had a really difficult task here to simultaneously nail the scene and not get swept away from the tidal wave of water and glass. In his own words, it took everything in his power to stay there for 3. Fair enough, no one wants to play chicken with an ocean. But more importantly, did it age well? The scene definitely benefits from its commitment to using real water instead of any kind of CG equivalent. There's a genuine sense of threat that it can do a lot of damage. It was a heavily coordinated stunt, and this comes across on camera. Not so much on the behind-the-scenes footage, which doesn't do any kind of justice to how dangerous the stunt was to pull off, but the way De Palma films it takes it to another level, and overall, it's a really solid stunt. If it wasn't a film today, it would only be aged by the fact that the stunt bar has been raised so much since, rather than how it was produced. Because of that, this gets a solid 6 out of 10. But I'm not sure I'll be so generous with the next stunt, because it's time to look at 90s CGI, famously about as convincing as a Tom Cruise marriage. So far, we've looked at things that could plausibly happen. But if the fight on top of a train moving at 200 miles per hour doesn't challenge realism, then the movie's climax in the Channel Tunnel certainly does. Not to mention a moment that defies physics where Hunt is propelled by an exploding helicopter onto the back of the bullet train. Initially, the idea was so ridiculous, Cruise refused to do it.
I'm just telling you right now, okay? Just put your manners back in.
But he ended up happy with the end result. Industrial Light and Magic, the pioneering visual effects studio that invented modern special effects, created the sequence. ILM at this point weren't too keen on CGI, but by the mid-1990s, filmmakers have become more and more reliant on it, often with mixed results, especially with anything featuring humans. The Rock as a scorpion, anybody? John Knoll, ILM's visual effects supervisor on the original Mission Impossible, avoided this pitfall by combining CGI with live action and old-school miniatures. Knoll's team kept CGI to a minimum, especially in augmenting Cruise. The real Cruise featured in all live-action components of the bullet train sequence, including that crazy jump from the exploding helicopter onto the back of the train. Although TGV gave Cruise permission to shoot on top of their fastest train, it quickly became obvious that the majority of the sequence needed to be filmed under a controlled situation on a soundstage. Try telling that to Cruise today. Apart from a few exterior shots, the crew mainly shot the sequence over 6 weeks on the 007 stage at Pinewood Studios, London. ILM, on the other hand, did most of their effects work in the glamorous location of their parking lot in San Rafael, California. Most of the Pinewood shoot had Cruise and John Voight tussling on the top of life-size models of 2 TGV train carriages, with a wind machine creating the gritty look of travelling at 200 miles per hour without a ticket. Both the stars and Jean Reno were also filmed on a life-sized helicopter. All these shots were filmed in front of a blue screen, later filmed in with ILM's effects work. There was also a CG helicopter and CG train used for exterior shots over the British countryside. ILM created the action inside the tunnel with a mix of CG assets, 1/8 scale miniature environments, a train miniature, and helicopter models rigged with explosives. Sounds like a fun Christmas for a train enthusiast. Knoll also pioneered a new technique called projection mapping to simulate the effect of the background zooming past at 200 miles per hour. So yeah, this wasn't just an afternoon on a computer. Looking at this sequence through 1996 eyes, it's pretty amazing, but that's the complete opposite of what this video is all about. Through today's lens, it's not quite as amazing, but let's be honest, it could be a lot worse. The shots outside the tunnel actually stand up better than those inside it, but then again at that point, there's not a helicopter strapped to a train flying inside a tube then exploding. If you look at similar CGI train sequences from recent movies, it's not like those have exactly covered themselves in glory either. Time hasn't been kind to this sequence as well as the others, but then again the stunts are a lot more ambitious and it's nowhere near as bad on a rewatch as I thought it was going to be. I'll give it a respectable 4 out of 10.